Sure. There's some of us here. I know there are some folks in studio right now. Sylvia, hopefully there are some studio watch parties right now as well. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the semester's lecture series. And our second speaker, Vanessa Keith, who Jonah is going to give a much fuller introduction for. My role here is to welcome you all and to let you know that we have our series is looking at land and infrastructure, and we just launched the poster and the full lineup just yesterday, and we look forward to seeing all of you in upcoming lectures as well. Thank you. And Jonah.
All right, thanks, Quillian. I'm really honored to have been given the opportunity to introduce Vanessa Keith, an architect and principal of Studioteka, a wide-ranging and much lauded and deservedly celebrated practice that applies her design expertise to diverse issues in the construction environment. Studioteka's award-winning work encompasses an admirable array of conceptually rich realized work on a variety of scales and provocative research projects. Vanessa Keith and Studioteka engage with speculative discourses, including Afrofuturism and indigenous futures, to develop compelling ideas about not simply what architecture should be in the present moment to address the world as it is, but also to envision how to reposition architecture to consider its potentials as a profession and a discipline. In doing this, she challenges us to ask questions of architectural practice. Where does it take place? For whom, and what are its implications for our collective futures beyond the myopic lens of the geographies and sites most immediately in front of us? Her book and virtual reality project 2100, A Dystopian Utopia, the city after climate change, which we'll be hearing about today, poses questions about how we might imagine a future in which our cities will be subject to the terrifying effects of climate disaster. Recognizing that, architects have a role to play in not just guiding our implementing policy, but also producing images of what the urbanism we inhabit will look like if we continue on the current course. The book and the project that we'll be hearing about offers hypothetical or even not so hypothetical warnings about the world that awaits us without drastic action. Vanessa Keith visualizes the disruptive consequences of climate disaster in 14 cities, and through them issues not only prescriptions and foreboding messages of caution. The project also conveys powerful ideas about resiliency and potential, should we choose to work with the environment. In that way, 2100 isn't only a Jeremiad that demands urgent action based on an appeal to shared values, it's likewise a call for us to carefully assess what our values are and how we design the places that manifest those values most visibly, our architecture and urban spaces. Studioteka has an impressively broad portfolio, and Vanessa Keith has an impressively broad educational background to match, with undergraduate and graduate degrees in religion and international affairs, economic development and urban planning, as well as a graduate degree in architecture. She's taught and lectured widely and has conducted design build projects with students in India, Italy, and Jamaica. On a personal note, having performed historical research across the Caribbean for my doctoral research, I especially admire her thoughtful work in that region, from the scale of residential and community building projects in Morant Bay and Kingston, Jamaica, to Costa Rica, to a master plan for the University of Puerto Rico and Rio Piedras. Her project for the revitalization of the waterfront zone of Kingston, a long neglected area prone to harsh weather events, demonstrates how design can play meaningful roles in considering the historical complexities of a site with vestigial inequalities due to histories of racial violence, colonialism, and slavery, but which today is vulnerable to the impacts of climate catastrophe. And so with that, I'll just repeat how much of a privilege it is to be able to now cede the floor to Vanessa Keith. So thanks so much for being here, and I'm excited to learn from your presentation.
Thank you so much, Jonah and Killian. I really appreciate it. And the Rio Piedras was done with when I was working for Hervé Descott of L'Observatoire International, but that was a really wonderful experience. Thank you so much. So I guess without further ado, I will just start and share a screen. I'll tell you a little bit about us and what, our obsessions and what we're doing. And, I'll run through some of the cities in the book that we've started to develop VR work for. And, and then we'll have questions, I guess, at the end. And I guess maybe it's a good idea if I put a timer. I think we have like an hour or something like that. I'll put a timer. Okay. All right, so let me just share a screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to do full screen. Can you see my screen now or not?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. If I change the page, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, you see a different image now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, good. All right. So I'm just sort of by way of introduction, I've been called an eco-futurist, but really as a Jamaican, my whole aim is how can I reach people? And VR is a really powerful tool for that. The immersive nature of the medium impacts all of your senses and overwhelms the physical space around you. It's almost a cliche now, but it has been called an empathy machine. And for me, that's really what it links it with climate. I'm from Jamaica. We don't have anywhere else to go. We don't have anywhere to migrate to. We are surrounded by ocean, right? So when I talk about that, and that's really where this comes from. Hold on, let me do show video panel so I can see you guys. Oh, perfect. Okay, so that's really where this starts for me. We started out doing research, and I was just, I got really tired of watching the hurricane tracker go past my house in Jamaica and then make its way up to New York. And I figured I really wanted to see if there's anything that we can do about this. And actually, if after all the research that I've done over the years, I can remain an optimist, I hope that you can too at the end of this lecture. Okay, let me go next. Right. Okay, all right, so we're aiming to develop the concepts in the book 2100, a Dystopian Utopia, into a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, an open virtual world where people are tasked with creating new ways to protect our cities against climate change threats. Players in this multiverse complete quest for points and expertise. They can choose between 3 roles: explorer, creator, and destroyer. Explorers chase storms and help cities prepare for them. Creators design climate change, impacts, solutions, and even interface with real inventors. And destroyers recycle defunct or non-sustainable elements of the city. There are also poachers who steal things and undermine climate solutions, but if they're caught in the act, they lose all of their points. We figured we had to leave room for some bad actors because you have those everywhere, right? So as far as Studioteka is concerned, we're currently obsessed with the environment, climate change, and the role that architecture can play in solving this crisis. And so here you're seeing, essentially Michael Sorkin, who was an incredible mentor of mine, invited me to submit a proposal for a book for urban research, and it essentially turned into this. This has been something that's just like a snowball rolling down a hill. It's just picked up momentum. We didn't have a huge budget. We didn't have a PR machine or anything. It was just really like talks like this one here, where I connected with people, and each talk somebody invited me to do more. And so that's what you're seeing here. On the left, you're seeing the first sort of big talk that I gave at Carnegie Mellon. You're seeing the Drawdown Learn conference. It was really, that's one of the authors, one of the people in Project Drawdown. She's phenomenal. And so we're holding each other's books at this conference. And then you can also see other talks that I gave for the Women in Architecture of the AIA and my team in the middle. So it's an interesting moment to re-envision human life and cities and how we live and interact with one another. And I really believe this. I want us to see this not as a loss, but as an opportunity. We are being given the opportunity to change a system that is not working for the vast majority of people, nor is it working for the planet. So I think we really should see this as an opportunity of, this could be the great moment of flourishing, of reinventing our role on the planet and how we see ourselves in relationship to all the other species and systems on this planet. how do human beings function as a system? What's the economics of it? And how can we work to make positive change? That's really the question that we ask ourselves over and over again. And here you can see again, a talk that I gave to the Louisville Sustainability Summit, keynote. You can see also on the lower right-hand corner, that was the first sort of, proof of the book. And that's in Michael Sorkin's office. And then also a talk that I gave at City College on Sandy and has the climate changed. So we can look at how we construct cities and try and live in balance with the rest of the planet. If we can solve that, we've nailed it. And I really believe that. That's really what we're trying to do. That's really our mission. And I think as somebody from the Caribbean, we don't have a choice. We don't have the choice to retreat. So instead, we're going to really push forward and we're going to see what we can do to solve this problem, and every little bit counts. So on the right, you're seeing some images from my office where I'm sitting right now. And the middle image, it's all of us with some folks from the Glimpse group who we're working with on this project, as well as Michael Sorkin in the middle. So for this talk, I really wanted to focus more on the work that we've been doing recently in VR. And the question that we've been asking ourselves is, how can we envision potential futures in VR? So one of the things that I find really compelling about VR is the immersive nature of it and how I can really tap into your humanity in a way by putting you inside of an experience in a way that no other medium can do. So just as an example, Stanford University's Virtual Human Interaction Lab found that if a person has a VR experience of cutting down a tree, feels the chainsaw vibrate through the controllers, hears the tree crash, that person is much more likely to conserve paper after that experience. Using VR to change human behavior works, but how does it work? What kinds of experiences can most effectively reach the largest number of people and have the most impact? So that's really why we started going in this direction, because the book is great. I love it. How can we do more? How can we reach more people? That's really what we need to do now. So in collaboration with the Glimpse Group, Studioteka is building the worlds of 2100, a dystopian utopia in VR as an open virtual world. We bring this research interest also into our design work in studios that we're teaching. So on the left is an image from Johannesburg, South Africa. In the middle is Moscow. And on the right is New York. So how do you reach people? By being immersed in worlds that speculate future versions of our realities. The immersive nature of the medium impacts all of your senses and overwhelms the physical space around you. And that's really, really key. It was actually really fun on the day that we got that picture that I showed you where we're with Glimpse. We actually got Michael into VR. We got him in a headset. Everyone did this and everyone knew that they were in an office, right? We are standing in office, obvious. But we did a thing where you actually jump, and in the VR space, you're falling 200 feet to the city, through the city. People fell in the office, even though they knew that they were standing in an office, just from the being overwhelmed by the sensation of the sound and the sight alone, right? So this is a really, really powerful tool. So the cities of the book are divided into extraction cities and compact megacities. I'm just going to go over some basic premises of this world that we've created. The extraction cities are Manila, Ross Island in Antarctica, Phoenix, Sao Paulo, New York, Kufra and Ajdabiya in Libya, and Beijing. The compact megacities, which are larger settlements, are Wellington, New Zealand, Johannesburg, Vancouver, Troll, Nuuk, Moscow, and Tinda in Russia. So if we get to a 4-degree world, and by the way, 4 degrees average warming, New York is 7 degrees warmer, this is what we're looking at. So this was one of the first visualizations we did of the problem, and it was shocking because basically all of this area, which is most of the known world, is now not great for large-scale settlements, because if you're constantly having fires or climate disasters, or for example, these things are the areas of maximum cyclonic storm, hurricane storm. So you've got hurricanes, you've got fires. We're seeing all of these things happening now, right? These things are all happening actually a lot faster than we thought. The good thing is that the speed of solutions is also happening faster than we thought. So the great middle band of the world is not a place where you can have megacities. So what can we do, right? So we started looking. We don't have a lot of space anymore, right? So if we have to depopulate or scale down population centers and move to the north and the south of that band, what are we going to do to meet our energy needs? If we want to meet our energy needs with green energy, renewable energy, and stop fossil fuel madness, which we really need to do, one of the things that we started looking at is how much of this energy would we need? And there's a carbon wedges thing that nobody really talks about anymore, but the business as usual arc goes up, and there are 7 wedges of offsets or reductions or whatever to get to stabilization, which is no incremental, like no additional carbon. 1 wedge of wind power is this much space in the United States. That's 1. You need 7 to meet the world's needs. So that's not going to work if we think only in terms of mono program, right? So we have like one thing and we have a space that's dedicated to one thing, right? That's not going to work. We really need things that are multifaceted. So again, here you can see that a wedge of wind power would require a combined area roughly the size of Germany. So you need 7 Germanys to meet the world's energy needs. So this is not going to work if we continue the same way of thinking and doing and being and living on the planet that we have now. And we know that. So what are we going to do and where in the world can we live is the question that we started to ask ourselves. So here is the flip side of that, right? So all the areas that you see here in green are areas where we can have large-scale settlements. That doesn't mean that the central middle band is uninhabitable. It just means that it's smaller scale settlements. But hey, we can also use that landmass for all sorts of renewable energy harvesting, right? So we can have solar power, wind power, geothermal, tidal power, biomass power, right? All of these things are, can be generated in these areas. So this is the part of the depressing part of the lecture. So we're going to talk about it, and then we're going to see how we move forward from this, right? So the Paris Climate Accord goal limited warming to only 1.5 degrees Celsius. We know that we're probably, if we continue the way we're going, we're going to far exceed that. We're currently on course for anywhere from 2 to 4.9 degrees Celsius of warming. Even 2 degrees of warming is considered catastrophic. So that's not okay. With our current rate of emissions, 1.5 degrees is likely in 15 years with huge damage to food production and clean water. So a lot of people are saying we have about 10 years to fix this, right? So that's something that we need to take very seriously. The last time CO2 concentrations were this high was before the Stone Age, millions of years ago. The world was a few degrees hotter and sea levels were tens of meters higher. So again, our business projection, our business as usual trajectory could be even 6 or 7 degrees of warming by 2100 if we do nothing. So doing nothing is not an option. So we started realizing that we really need to break out of the sort of mental silo that we have. We have a crisis of imagination, which is something that I've said before. If we continue to use the planet the way that we're doing, we have separate areas for everything. We have mono program, right? We're going to need 450% more than we have in terms of the Earth. So we need 4.5 more planets in order to meet our needs, and that's obviously not feasible. So we started looking at if we scale down population in the middle band, what do we have left for human inhabitation and food production, assuming that we have about 10 billion people? So we started looking at renewable energy and at scaling down the amount of individual space that each person has. We definitely can do 80% renewable by 2050. That's technically possible. We have the tools, the techniques, the technologies now to do that, but it's politically unlikely, and that's not okay, right? So we need to do more. By 2100, we believe that we could have 100% renewable energy. Is it possible to do this? Yes, but drastic change is needed. Drastic change can also be an incredible, for lack of a better word, flowering, a renaissance, a reinvention, a re-indigenizing, a reconnection with our role on the planet as part of the planet, not as a system that stands apart and aside from the planet that is somehow gifted with the ability to plunder and destroy and not consider other species, right? So what do we need to do? Well, we need to maintain or increase current living standards for all by densifying and going vertical, vastly increased efficiency through technological innovation, and techniques such as soft edges at the shoreline to blunt the forces of waves. We need to rebuild our wetlands to absorb flooding. We need vastly decreased energy for transportation and buildings. Yes, that means you, architects. Our food sources need to be near centers of population, vegetarian diets, ideally to reduce carbon footprint, and hybrid spaces that combine farming, energy generation, recreation, and other uses. So I'm going to now go into some of our case study cities. I'll show you some of the stuff from the book, and then I'll also go into some of the visualizations we've been doing as we develop our VR project. So this is New York. In 2100, New York has become the storm energy capture center of the Western Hemisphere. So we figured this is a big, lemon that New York has been handed. So why not make lemonade, right? So storm surge barriers have been closed farther downstream, while the secondary barriers that lie at the water's edge have already been inflated, and plantings and artificial sponge islands form a third layer of defense. Meanwhile, more productively, tidal turbines beneath the surface of the water gather wave energy at the soft edge boundary of the energy park. So here you can see the master plan. This is what it looked like in 2014. By 2050, you're going to see that the Gowanus Canal will have expanded and flooded some of the areas adjacent. And with 4 degrees of warming average in 2100, this is what it will look like. So we just have a very light, you can see the original canal underneath here, and it's considerably larger. What we have in this master plan, though, is a sponge park that sits at the edges that absorbs the stormwater. We have all of our green energy infrastructure here. We also have areas where people can live. And this park is also generating renewable energy. And here we have a storm surge barrier that sits at the mouth of this. Underneath, there are tidal turbines. So this is a calm state view. So you're seeing the sort of the energy generating park and the spongy layers that are here to blunt the forces of the waves. This is it on a nice day. And now I'm going to show you some of our visualizations. So the first one is a street scene under the elevated F train bridge in Gowanus. The other one is just 2100 Gowanus, and the third one is the canal and the energy park. So as I mentioned before, we don't have a crisis of tools and technologies. We have a crisis of imagination. We've made this world and these problems that we have, and we can transform it. But the first thing that we need to do is to envision it differently. So what's happening? Hold on a minute. I think I hit a glitch. Wait a second. I think the problem might be the screen, the full screen. Can you unfull screen? Sorry, we've been having some technical difficulties. Just give me a minute. myself. Okay, you guys, I think we fixed it. Sorry about this. Work. Okay. All right, so that was just, I apologize. We've been having technical difficulties all day. We've just moved back into the office. My apologies for that. Can you hear me okay? Yes?
Perfectly.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, so that what you saw is just a street scene in Gowanus. We're using the area where the F train is elevated. And so you're seeing how we've transformed the site, how we've transformed the buildings. The buildings have, we're trying to grow as much, as much plantings and green stuff there as we possibly can. And we're also combining things like, for example, inside sidewalks, we've got piezoelectric panels. There's also, those things are also in the ground, right? So that when you move over a surface, you're generating energy. Can you move so that it's hard to have, move there. But thank you. I want to be able to see you because it feels like kind of foreboding. Sorry, somebody from my team's here. Thank you. Okay, all right, so let's continue. Sorry, guys. Okay, so what you were just seeing now is you're seeing the preparation happening before the storm, right? And so you're seeing the bridge that we've outfitted with something that I call clip-on architecture, right? Where we are using all of the surfaces of the built environment to generate energy, to grow things that are absorbing CO2 out of the atmosphere, so that we no longer have buildings that just have what I call like dumb facades, right? So that we have like the entire built environment is participating in this because we need it. We need the space. We can no longer afford to have in this world spaces that are used only for one program or infrastructure that is just sitting there that's not being used for a dual purpose. So even you'll see in some of the visualizations, the bridges also have disaster packs, right? So you have a pack of stuff in case it floods that can be deployed off of our infrastructure. So here you're going to see the underwater turbines as the storm surge barrier is closing. Underneath, the turbines are generating energy. And what's happening there is that we need to blunt the forces of the waves so that we don't have a massive force that's going to break our infrastructure, but we need to have enough come in that we can use it to generate energy. So that's what you're going to see next. And so let me just play. So that's what is underneath the Gowanus Canal. So that's our, some of our vision for New York. The idea, though, is really that all of this technology that everything that we're referencing is something that already exists or is in development. So these are things that we could start to do now so that we don't have to go to a 4-degree world. And that's really the message of the book. So now I'm going to go into Wellington, New Zealand, in a different part of the world. This is a compact megacity, and this city is a place that one of the things that we're going to be looking at here is how can we add density and how can we occupy areas that haven't been settled before, in the sense that all of the arable land needs to be used to grow food. A lot of the good land is already taken. And so we've actually chosen a site that's a very difficult site. It's a gorge. And so we're envisioning a radial settlement where we start to have bridges that we call Furry Bridges that have filaments on them that generate energy from the wind. So that's some of what you're going to see next. So between two adjacent hilltops, a direct approach is enabled by Furry Bridges which span the valleys far above the flood zone. So we're envisioning that Wellywood, which is New Zealand's Hollywood, would have to move because it's in a tsunami evacuation zone, and that we would find a site for it by this gorge. So these bridges are equipped with follicle-like extrusions, which are actually piezoelectric discs wrapped in a carbon fiber flexible casing. When air moves the follicles, energy is created, allowing Wellington to make use of one of its most abundant energy sources, wind. Along the hillsides, land scrapers are partially submerged in the ground. In some cases, the building forms cut away to bring daylight in, while other buildings employ a series of helio follicles that follow the path of the sun to funnel daylight into the interior through fiber optic cables. So here you can see the master plan. Sorry if it's a bit small, but you're seeing a radial settlement and bridges that are spanning between the hilltops. And we're envisioning that you would have, it's a different type of form since it's not a grid, and that we would have buildings that everybody needs to occupy or use would be at the top. And then we would have sort of neighborhood layers and then other things that are in between. And you would basically be spanning up and down the hills. We are also imagining that you would be using something akin to what they have in Valparaiso in Chile, which is a funicular tram. Here you can see a section cut through some of the landscapers, and you can also see the Furry Bridge. Here's a view looking into the funicular tram stop. You can see we're approaching the top of the hill here. So here we're going to show you just some recent development where Wellington is the one that we've started working on most recently. So we only have one, but you're going to see the exterior of a landscraper, which has a growing facade, wind turbines, and also solar glass. So one of the things that I wanted to say is that a lot of the messaging around climate change is intensely negative. So our thinking is maybe we could get more people on board using fun, right? Now, what if a byproduct of your enjoyment of this online multiplayer game is actually doing good works in the world outside of the game? So that's one of the things that we're thinking about, is creating community and also creating a back and forth loop between the world of the game and the connections that people have there, and then also actually impacting in a positive way the real world or the outside world. Okay, so Moscow, Russia is another one of the case study cities. Here we're looking at how do we add density, and so we're looking at how can we add more density, in any way possible. This was designed parametrically, but we're also looking at how can we add additional mass on top of existing buildings, which is something we also looked at in New York. But in this case, Moscow has huge boulevards, right? So we don't need as much room for cars, and the cars that you see are going to be 100% electrical cars. But we started looking at how we could create a megastructure that spans across and that anchors itself at the intersections of these large boulevards, which is what you're seeing here. So densification weaves over and through the older urban fabric, and that's what you're seeing here. So in the middle, you can see those sort of towers. I don't know if you can see my mouse here, and then you see these structures that are weaving above the boulevards. And then the city fabric that's on the left and on the right has additions that are on the top. And we were just sort of having fun here. These are kind of playful diagrams of densification strategies, but we started imagining how we could add additional mass to existing buildings to accommodate a larger population from the middle band. So here you can see a section. We've got the two mega structures that are at the intersections, and you're slicing through them. These also have vertical farming inside. We've got a hyperloop here, and we're connecting to the existing metro stop. And here's another view looking at the twisting megastructure and how it weaves through the city. So I'm going to show you 4 visualizations that we've done with our VR software. So we have a street scene with the Piezoelectric Highway. We've got diagonal conveyors, which are going in those arms of the megastructure. We have an exterior of a vertical farm, an interior of a vertical farm, and a view that shows the city as a forest. And one of the things that we keep going back to is, what would cities be like if we didn't have this false construct of the difference between humanity and nature as separate things. I think a lot of the problems that we have are actually like our mental constructs. Even when we try to collaborate, we're still siloed. And so one of the things that I found in doing the research for this is that we have one person over here who's got an amazing idea, who's not talking to somebody else who they should be collaborating with. So I think if we can really challenge these habits of mind that we have and think about the problem differently, we can come up with solutions. So let me see, okay. So this is the Piezoelectric Highway and the electric cars. And you're also seeing the horizontal conveyor in the background in the distance. This is the diagonal conveyor that's going up one of the arms of the megastructure. You can also see that there are all sorts of energy devices that are embedded in the infrastructure, as well as areas of growing. This is the outside of another structure that is being used for urban farming. And you can see also that we are using the exterior surfaces of the built environment to grow things. Everything is participating in this, mission of generating more energy and absorbing carbon. This one doesn't seem to be going. I think maybe it's slow. Oh wait, I missed one. I think I missed one. Yes, okay. This is the inside of the vertical farm. And this is another part of the city where you're seeing our idea of city as forest. The discs that you see on the ground are piezoelectric generators. And we also have the idea that if you can have a soft scape instead of a hardscape, you can absorb floodwaters, right? And have a better end result, right? We have far too much hardscape in our cities. So then I'm going to talk about Johannesburg in South Africa. So in this city, we really started looking at the relationship between human beings and the animal world, and how we are a part of that, and how if we're going to, if we're going to continue on this path, and we've already had like a tremendous die-off of so many species in the past, even like 70 years, right? We're going to have to also consider giving over some of the land in our cities and spaces in our cities to the other inhabitants of the planet who have as much right as we do to be here. So if you look at this image here, we've got nesting areas for weaver birds that are on the facade. And as well, again, the same idea is present here, which is that we're using the built environment to be much more multifaceted and much more active and performing than it is currently. So in a world that is ever more densely populated with human beings, all surfaces of the built environment must be thought of as potential sites for intervention. So that's what you're seeing here. Johannesburg is a megacity, which means it's going to have to increase in population from where it is now. So both elements, and that refers to the animal kingdom and the human kingdom, both elements are allowed to coexist peacefully by separating them in section, enabling wildlife to pass uninterrupted below the elevated urban domain. Agricultural areas also incorporate protected corridors for wildlife, allowing for safe travel through them and between conservation areas and sanctuaries by way of animal bridges. So here you see the master plan, and you can see that we've got a transportation node here. These are super fast maglev trains. And these are the megastructures which are oriented on them. You've got smaller scale farming plots in between the buildings, and then larger scale plots further out. Here you see a section, so you can see the elevated settlement. And so what we're trying to do is shift and slope the landscape so that we have, the animals can flow in one direction, the humans can be in another, the humans are elevated, the animals are passing in between. And we think that if we do this, we can find a way of coexisting within the same space. So here you can see one of the animal bridges, and these things are something that is already in use in Canada. And you can see here we've got a vehicle that's going underneath there. So these are the combined habitats, human and animal, in Johannesburg, South Africa. So I'm going to show you an animal sanctuary, a view between the megastructures to the market and the market. So our vision of 2100 is one of ongoing expansion, community building, and a trove of real world applications. 2100 will become a community gathering place for eco-aware people while also turning gameplay from a mere pastime into a transformative adventure. So here you can see parts of the animal sanctuary looking at one of the megastructures. And here you have a view between the megastructures. You can see the bird nesting areas on the facade, and then we're going to go into the market. Those bands you see below you are wind belts, and below that is a maglev train. And below that is an animal underpass. Let me see, I think this is loading. Hold on. Okay, this is the interior of the market. Again, you can see all of the surfaces of the built environment are being used either to generate energy or to grow things or to be a habitat for animals. So I'm just going to sort of wrap up by talking about some of the great stuff that's going on in the world now. These are things that I find every day, different people that I follow on Twitter who are always looking for solutions or things that just sort of come up. And I think that it's interesting and important to acknowledge that there's a lot of really great stuff going on too, not just problems, right? So for example, there's an IGA supermarket that has a 1.5 acre farm on the roof with over 30 types of vegetables sold in the store below. And this is in Montreal. This technique reduces stormwater runoff and the heat island effect. I'm sure that you can probably read faster than I can speak, but I think that it suffices to say that there's a lot of really great stuff going on. There's one example of extreme resiliency, right? After Hurricane Maria, there was a farm in Puerto Rico that was not impacted by the failure of the power grid thanks to 244 solar panels the farmer invested 6 years ago to power his 40-acre flower nursery, right? So thinking about having food and energy be localized to the building, I think is also something that is important for us to explore. So again, everyone has heard of Curitiba. I think it's a really good example. If you haven't heard of it, you should definitely look it up. It's a city of 2 million inhabitants in Brazil. It operates a rapid bus transit system, which is cheaper to operate than a subway. 80% of travelers use it, and it carries nearly 2 million passengers per day. No one lives more than 400 meters from a bus stop, which results in a 25% lower carbon emissions per capita than the average for Brazilian cities. A trash for produce or token scheme also enables Curitiba to recycle 70% of its waste. Curitiba's model has since been replicated in some 200 other cities, right? There are also a lot of cities in the developing world that have already implemented single-use plastics ban. Costa Rica has had so many days of 100% renewable energy that it's not even news anymore. 21 African countries are creating a great green wall of trees surrounding the Sahara Desert with a wide belt of vegetation to green and protect an agricultural landscape. More than 11 million drought-resistant acacia trees have been planted in Senegal. The trees reduce erosion, the leaves provide compost, the canopy increases humidity in the environment, reducing the need for watering. The roots hold water in the soil, and wells that had gone dry are full again. Germany leads the EU in recycling 79% of all the waste it produces. Germany's total waste volume in 2015 was 402.2 million metric tons, of which 317.7 were recycled. German manufacturers are held responsible for recycling any waste they produce or disposing of it safely. That's a really good point, and it's something that implementing here and in other places I think would go a long way. So here's the thing I always, when I give talks, I mention, and everyone goes home and unplugs everything, but we spend more money on electricity to power devices when off than when on. Televisions, stereo equipment, computers, battery chargers, and a host of other gadgets consume more energy when seemingly switched off, so unplug them instead. We could also ask why it is like that. Why can't we change our systems so that they're not so wasteful? Again, buildings worldwide contribute about 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions. So upgrading our existing infrastructure through increased energy efficiency, better insulation, and simple steps like greening or painting roofs white will go a long way toward reducing this figure, as will finding less carbon-intensive methods of construction, including green deconstruction instead of demolition, and recycling or reuse of building materials. Okay, let's see. And, just in terms of carbon renewal and coming attractions, there's a lot of research going on about carbon capture and sequestration. One of the things that has been a real groundbreaker for this is that we can now sequester carbon as a brick as opposed to as a gas. That makes a huge, huge difference in the viability of this. And, just to conclude, take a look at the book if you're interested. Reach out to us. Our email is here, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. That was really totally thought-provoking and wonderful. And what a sort of exciting set of ideas. What I appreciated most, I think, is the implication that virtual reality isn't exclusive of lived reality, but it's maybe something like a supplement. At the same time that it sort of adds to tangible reality as we live it, it's also itself real. What I wonder about in the kind of images that you showed is this idea of showing us sort of visions of cities in some future period that in a lot of ways don't necessarily look like the cities that we see today. So, I live in Gowanus, and, it's,
Jonah, are you there? I see you frozen.
I think he's frozen for the moment.
Oh no.
Hi, Vanessa. He'll be back.
Hi.
He'll be back.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, dear.
Well, I guess I could answer part of his question. Why do the cities not look like the cities we have today? I mean, I think we haven't shown you everything, but we actually in New York have brownstones and have the sort of typical 6-story brick building to which we've added layers on the top and added, infrastructure, right? So we have this idea. I think one of the things we really need to look into, and that's one of the things that you'll see over and over again in the book, is retrofitting what we already have, right? So I think a lot of the time when you look at ideas of sort of green utopia, and this is a dystopian utopia, it's not purely utopian because this is not really what we want, is to go to a 4-degree world. That's not the goal at all. But we really focused a lot on how we can green retrofit and add to existing infrastructure. And so that's really our starting point for a lot of this. I don't see Jonah.
No,
I
think he's having some problems. Hi, Vanessa,
no.
Alicia, and
Okay.
Reality faculty here.
It's quite all right. I mean, I had my share of technical difficulties. I'm really sorry about that earlier.
No problem. A
No,
couple of
we
us
all
are going to
do.
take over now, Laura and myself, and we have some questions that have been collected by students.
Sure.
And so let's go through some of these. And Laura, do you want to start or should I start with one?
You could start. I'm just pulling them up.
So I think that there's a lot of conversation around some of the potential realities of and what this could look like. So I'm going to ask one around labor. How can we ensure that those who do the hard work of maintaining systems are equitably compensated rather than exploited? And these, like the hardest workers today, how can these ideas of a future be implemented to our current lives? So how can these visions take into account the work and the people that are going to be building them? And then how can we begin to learn from those potential futures today?
Well, I think one of the things that I would say, and I think it's become pretty obvious, is that capitalism is not really the way to go into a future. So one of the things that's underpinning all of the work in the book is that everybody has pretty much the same stuff. Like, we don't have disparities of income, we don't have McMansions, we don't have one person occupying thousands and thousands of square feet for just themselves, and other people living in a slum. Right. So we're imagining that in order to go into this future, we're going to need to figure out how to work together, because climate doesn't care about our national boundaries or the boundaries between one neighborhood and another. And I think one thing that's actually happened that's been very interesting is initially we thought, well, everyone will just retreat from the coast, so the areas inland will be safer. But that's absolutely not been the case. We have inland hurricanes, we have inland flooding that's far from the edge of the sea. So everybody is impacted. Yes, we do definitely have a disparity in terms of who is most responsible, who has the biggest carbon footprint. But one of the things that I like to say is, if we're in a ship that's sinking, I'm not really going to care if your bucket to bail is bigger or smaller than mine, as long as we manage to bail the ship out, right? So I think that everybody has to do their part and do what they can. But I want to make clear that I'm absolutely not envisioning carrying over the types of political systems and inequalities and every kind of ism of the planet. That stuff has to go. Right now, we are in a really pivotal moment in human history where we have to make a choice. We can either hold on to that stuff and go over a cliff, or we can reinvent ourselves. And that's really what I'm hoping that we will do. It is not possible to do the type of massive change that we need over the next 10 years and leave in place the types of gross inequalities and systems that are in place that are vastly unfair, not only to one another among humans, but also to other species. We also need to consider the needs and the rights of nature and of other species in this. I think we're entirely too human-centric in our views. So I think that essentially what I would say is, we're going to have to change those things. And if we do not change those things, we will go extinct. So that's really the choice that we have. The planet will be fine. It will be here. It will just be hotter. It has been hotter before. It just wasn't the same species living on it.
Thanks, Vanessa. I'm sorry, my internet cut out at of course, the perfect time. What I wanted to ask about, and maybe this is sort of picking up on what you were saying about what to carry over into this kind of future that you're envisioning, I wonder about the kind of existing buildings and cities that we inhabit today. And it seems to me, just to kind of frame this, ideas of creative destruction are inherent in capitalism. I imagine this is sort of part of the framework. But I wonder about whether there's room for example, historic preservation in the cities that you're envisioning for 2100.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we envisioned that there would be places that we would want to preserve that people would visit, right? But preserving those things and safeguarding them against climate catastrophe is going to have to be a collective choice that we make as humans. What do we value and what do we want to preserve? Because we will not be able to preserve everything. So even in the New York example, we were envisioning that we would have, that people would come and, maybe you would do an exchange, right? Maybe you would come, we're envisioning these settlements being paired in some way. I might go from, New York to somewhere else and do a sort of a work tour or something like that. Maybe I get like some kind of a benefit from that or something like that. And so I can go and I can work on the energy installations. Maybe I also could go there and I could tour them, or I could see some of the things, in New York that we've decided to preserve, right? The rest of it, a lot of it, we're envisioning as green deconstruction, and we're envisioning areas of like megacities and concentrated human inhabitation, smaller scale settlements in places like New York, and then a vast wilderness, right? As well as some areas that are used for combined, again, smaller settlements, energy installations, things like that. But I do think that wilderness is important. And I do think that pulling back on sprawl is really, really important.
Yeah, it's interesting how much you're sort of implicitly referring to, and I, just to kind of throw in a few of the references, I imagine O.M. Ungers's Berlin as Green Archipelago seems so relevant to what you're talking about, sort of withdrawing rather than simply building as a kind of architectural act, sort of a negative building.
Well, I mean, I think we need to, we've spread ourselves over the, almost the entire, if you look, there are actually some studies that there's one person who's looking for silence, right? And there's almost no place that's untouched by the sound of human inhabitation on this entire planet, right? And that's pretty crazy, right? So I think it's a matter of figuring out how can we live better? How can we create the kind of community? And I kept going back to college campuses, or, why does everybody romanticize these like 4 years of your life? It's really not a long time, right? But everybody has these really vivid memories, many of them good, about a space that's walkable, about a place where you run into your neighbors, about a place where you can live and eat and work and have fun and hang out. And it's all in an area that's, that's a contiguous community that's walkable, right? I think that there's something there. I think that there's something to creating community through having a mission, or something that we're doing that's productive, that we are positively transforming the planet together. And that is something that I think will be full of a lot of joy. I think when we actually finally decide to do this, I don't think it's going to be something that makes people feel sad for what we have now. We're just afraid of we don't know what the future holds. So we're terrified at the idea of losing something that we know. But this thing that we know is taking us over a cliff. So we have to change. And I think that if anything, I think COVID has accelerated that process, because we've actually, look at how quickly we shifted. Yes, there is still huge inequalities in terms of who is able to stay home and who had to go out into the world. But the world economy didn't crater. We were able to figure out how to do things differently, right? Because we had to. And this is the same. We have to. We can ignore this and we will go over a cliff. And the climate calamities will keep coming. They're not going to go away just because we don't think about it. So we really have an important choice to make. And we have about 10 years to really get it together.
Yeah, well, so I want to turn to some of the student questions at this point. And I'll do this maybe with a kind of transition to say that I find really interesting in your answer to Quillian's question that that you were talking about sort of decentering the human, but in many ways also your the proposal, as you said, is that that the Earth will still remain, and many of our flora and fauna will adapt in certain ways, but it's also, it continues to be a question of how, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Actually, our flora and fauna won't, they can't adapt, and neither can we to this. The pace of change is too dramatic. So what I said is, it's not like everything's going to be okay. The planet will be here. It will just be a very different planet. If you look at, there's a really, I mean, aside from my book, 2100, I also recommend Drawdown is a fantastic book. So is 6 Degrees. 6 Degrees looks in the fossil record. That's how we know what it will be like with a 6-degree warming. There are, in the fossil record, there were palm tree type things in Antarctica. So there will be stuff here. It just won't be any of the stuff that you recognize now. And that's not a good thing.
Yeah, no, thanks for that correction. That's really valuable. I wonder, one of the students asked a question about how we can ensure those who do the hard work of maintaining the systems that we use in order to ensure equitable compensation rather than exploitation of
we need to get rid of capitalism. Okay, capitalism is not working. Sorry. All of these ideas, we made this system. It is a system that we created. I don't know that I'm not saying that there's another system that exists now that's better. I don't know that there is. I think we need something completely new. I don't know exactly what that is yet. But when we're talking through that and we're talking about how do we scrap all of that, the way that we value human life and the way that we don't value the inputs into our production chain, which is a line rather than a circle, is completely wrong. And it's not going to work. And we have to change. That's the choice we have now. The way that we do things has to change, or that's the choice that we have. We can keep it. We can keep going. We can keep inequality. We can keep extracting and plundering our resources, and we will go over a cliff. So we have to change. What that looks like exactly in the future, I don't quite know yet in terms of the political system. I also know that it's not going to necessarily be something that there are powerful forces at play who want to keep things the way that they are. But I think the vast majority of people realize that that we're not going to be on the spaceship going out of here while this place is on fire. If you think you've got a seat on the spaceship, I'm telling you, you're probably wrong. And we got to stay here. And so in the same way, like we're all Jamaicans, we don't have a planet B. We don't have somewhere else to go. So we have to stay and make it work. And by making it work, it means we have to do the work to change. We have to do the work. One of the things that I think is incredibly powerful is looking to Indigenous folks, looking to folks who understand how to live on this planet successfully for thousands of years. Our culture does not have that. We are a flash in the pan. Civilizations come and go. Our civilization is very young. Can we think outside the box? Can we think outside our mental silos that we're in? That's really the problem that we have. We have a huge imagination problem. So that's, again, that's another reason for the VR. And, I haven't answered I don't have answers for everything. I mean, we're developing this. I can't solve the entire world, but I'm trying. And I'm trying to do this for the, 70 to 80% of Jamaicans who, will never be able to leave Jamaica no matter what happens.
Yeah, well, so maybe, again, picking up on some student questions, I think, some of them are sort of around, I'm trying to consolidate a few, around the idea of representation. So on what level do these sort of aesthetic gestures that you're making sort of point us in the direction of solutions?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So one, just to read off of, one of the questions is, how does the medium of representation impact the message? How can architects and artists better embrace mediums to better activate through art? Okay,
so I guess the question I would ask that person is, have you ever been in VR? Because it's phenomenal. I don't know why more of us in our field are not doing this. I don't understand why, because it's an amazing immersive tool where you can actually be in the space that you're designing. If I put you in a VR environment, I could make you the size of a child. You will behave differently if you have to interact with somebody who's a giant. I put my students in just recently in some different experiences. There's one that's called The Key. That's an incredibly moving experience about the refugee crisis. And it's based on the idea that every refugee has a key to a place that no longer exists. That's heartbreaking. In this piece, you have the experience of not being able to operate things, and your hands are these gloves. You can't press anything, right? And things are happening to you. And then there's some instructions that things that you're supposed to do. And in the end, you actually see this room over and over again. And in the end, you see the room after it's been bombed, and you see an actual 360 video of the place that is the reference point of the piece. At one moment in that piece, there's almost like a cartoonish snarling monster that comes at you, and it's bigger than you, and you can't really tell what it's going to do. The first time I did this, I had to X out of this thing. And I told myself afterwards, Vanessa, it's like a cartoon monster. Why can't you get past that point in the experience? But these things are actually really real. There have been studies about mirror neurons and how when you see somebody, that the empathy thing is very real, right? So I think that there's something tremendously powerful in that as a tool to really give us a sense of what is possible, but then also give us a sense of connection and communion and putting ourselves in the place of others, right? So there's Marshmallow Laser Feast has a piece or a couple of pieces, but there's one that's called In the Eye of the Animal. And it puts you in the place of a non-human actor. There's another one called Tree, where you are a rainforest tree and you grow from a seedling into a giant tree. Your arms are the branches of the tree. That's something that you can't do with any other medium. If I can do that with you through VR, I can make you experience and understand things, and maybe I can make you care or see this in a different way. We need to see our way through this problem, and we need to use all of the tools that we possibly can to really enhance that. In order to change, you need to first be able to picture change. And I feel like we're so stuck. We can't even imagine our way out of this. And so that's really why I've turned to this as a way forward.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. I think Jonathan Shelsa has a question that he wants to ask. Is he here?
You're muted, Jonathan.
I have a double mute just in case of these situations, so sorry about that. So first off, Vanessa, thank you very much for your presentation. It's really exciting to see your foray into this medium. That is something that I know a lot of our students are extremely excited about. And the imagery and virtual reality is extremely compelling in the way that it creates a monstrous reworking of some of the ideas about nature that are deeply embedded in the modern project, particularly vis-a-vis nature and the human, non-human. My question with regard to that actually stems a bit from some of the discussions that Jonah brought up earlier with regard to projects such as of degrowth, such as Unger's Green Archipelago versus some of the work that you show. You use the word mega in several instances, particularly in relationship to, as well as in some of the writing about your work, you refer to clip-on. So a lot of this terminology comes out of a period of the 1960s when there was a high optimism. And I'm trying to reconcile that against what you're also referring to as a dystopic understanding of a future, or perhaps a next setting where it is not perhaps the desired outcome. So I guess I'm curious how and why you seem to be preferencing or privileging the idea of the extremely large intervention as opposed to perhaps more of the micro scale.
Okay. Thank you for that. I guess, well, I think that one of the things that we started doing when we started our research was how can we quantify this problem? If it's a dystopian utopia and that we're envisioning that we got to a 4-degree world, that's, not utopian. But we also envisioned that we did it in a way without wars and massive die-offs. So how do we locate ourselves there? It's not perfect. It's not what we want, but it's not the worst case scenario either, right? And 4 degrees, by the way, when we started, I think actually Michael told me at one point, he said, this is science fiction, right? And it's absolutely things really changed over the course of several years in terms of that reading of it. And now 4 degrees looks like it's pretty middle of the road, right? So in terms of, I guess, like the mega, we looked at how many humans, like if we follow the projections of human beings and we don't imagine a huge die-off or a huge drop in in fertility rates or whatever, 10 billion people, in order to occupy the amount of land that's left after, because what happens is if you look at the middle band of the world, like you look at the equator, all of the ecosystems are going to be moving up and down, right? So coffee might grow here and then it's going to grow here, right? So it's going to get hotter, 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 hotter. So if we have that, the storms and everything, the burning is going to be in that area. So if we want to have accommodation for all of the humans that are going to be on the planet, we're going to have to put ourselves in, closer proximity. We're going to have to use less individual space, and we're going to have to occupy parts of the planet, like, we have a settlement in Antarctica. There are a lot of the areas that are left are like over a gorge or cliffs, or areas that haven't been megacities, or areas that we need to add to, like Vancouver, right, which is a city now, which we could have more people in. So we were looking at what is the overall, like what is the most densely populated place in the world now, and how many square meters per person should we have, and how many people would we be able to accommodate? And that's how we ended up saying that, like, a smaller scale, spread out, sprawl type of situation is not really sustainable. It's not going to accommodate those numbers of people. I love the idea of just kind of going off the grid and having my, acres of land and just, small number of people there, but that's not going to work given our current numbers in terms of population. So we looked at how can we move people to a place that's safe and accommodate them. And so we looked at, we're going to scale back the amount of individual private space that we have, and we're going to share resources and share spaces that are then used for multiple purposes. So we're going to have farms that are also recreation, that are also energy generating, that are also many multiple things. And we're going to also try to, like in the case of Johannesburg, have shifts in the section so that we can actually accommodate human and animal life within the same realm. I hope that answers your question.
It elaborates on it quite a bit. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I think Alicia Imperiale had a question.
Hey, Vanessa, I suppose it follows up on Jonathan's question. So I was thinking of, kind of my scholarship is very much in the 1960s in terms of some of these earlier phases of thinking through ecology and building and so forth. And so I was thinking of Paolo Soleri's Arcology, The City in the Image of Man of 1969. And so it was like twofold. So part of it was Soleri was, and I think with Jonathan's question, it actually just expanded in a different way that I haven't thought about it this way. So I thank you for that invitation. So Soleri at that time was thinking that cities should contract, and that they would become these, that he would call them like almost like the city of Babel. So they were like to be for like 1 to 2 million people. The Statue of Liberty was used as scale. And he thought to then, so it was earlier in your talk where you were speaking about kind of the retraction into these different places and allowing the landscape to go back to be productive, to kind of, and he called it kind of a return to the wild. And so, yeah, so it was kind of like wondering about any of those kind of references that might be earlier and if they could be productive now. So it was less a question and observation, perhaps.
I think it's, I think again, there are a lot of problems with modernism, but I think one of the good things about it was the notion that architecture could change the world and that the built environment could impact in some way our interactions with one another. And I think that that's actually an important thing to consider. We do know that if you have a school that has narrower corridors, you have more fights. We do know that these things about how our environment impacts, human life. In terms of Solari, I mean, I don't, I know I had somebody who worked for me a bunch of years ago had actually lived there and talked about it a lot. And it seems like Arcosanti was a really interesting idea. I mean, I think, there have been lots of different utopian communities, and, we can certainly make a utopian community, but in terms of thinking about how we are going to accommodate the numbers of people on the planet equitably, right? In a way so that, because I can buy a bunch of acres of land and make a beautiful utopia, but then what's going to happen is we have to keep people out, right? Because we are going to have more than other people, and you end up with the sort of inequality equation again.
Of course,
right?
That's a blind spot in that project for sure back then. And so, just kind of, that model. So if it steps outside of capitalism, how does that work? So it seems to be really what you're trying to invite us to really contemplate in your talk.
I think, I think thinking about, one of the reasons I love science fiction, and I really like Ursula K. Le Guin a lot, because she's fantastic, and she looks at not just sort of spaceships and tech, but she looks at how societies work, and so, underpinning all of this are, as we were working on the book, I kept thinking about like what this world would be like and how we would live there and how we would interact with one another as something, fairly different from what we have now in terms of we cannot interact now except through the lens of inequality. Everything is through that lens. Our status is through that lens. You can't avoid it. It's, you cannot talk as equals across our society because our society is so flawed in that way. So I think that really envisioning what it could be like in a positive way to fix the many problems that we have that have gotten us here, I think is a really productive place to be. I don't claim to have all of the answers. And, I invite people to, work with us on this, let's do this together. Let's envision potential futures. Let's create a different and better world for everyone together. I mean, I think that's really, and I was saying to somebody the other day, like, I don't know what it's like to live without having a mission. And architecture gives me that. And I'm really, really grateful for that. I don't know what my life would be without that, because it gives me a tremendous sense of meaning. And that's the only way that I can exist, being where I'm, where I'm from, because, otherwise it's just me and the storm tracker stressing out. We're in hurricane season now, and that's terrifying.
Yeah, it's terrible. And it's the play that you have with the terms utopia of no place, of dystopia, the wrong place, right? The utopia, and the way that I think that you're playing and in your beautiful work. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think for me, just personally as a person, I mean, I am Black, white, and Chinese, and I think that I occupy this weird realm between things. And I understand what it's like to be multiple things at the same time. And so thinking about something that is both utopian and dystopian and trying to move from that position, which is, a trajectory that we're on, to one of many potential futures.
Yeah.
How can we turn this around? How can we reinvent our systems, our ways of life on the planet? That's really, I think, one of the huge things that's underpinning all of this work. It's not just about the built environment and we're going to put screens of green stuff growing everywhere.
It's incredible. Thank you.
We had a question from Jack Foster about the gameplay aspects of the project. He says, they say, we've gotten an idea of how the project is situated architecturally, but how do you situate this project in the field of game design?
Well, that's one of the things that we're working on now, and I can't really talk about that, but thanks for asking. That's currently in development, so stay tuned.
Exciting. It's like a cliffhanger.
And check our Instagram, because we're going to be, continually updating and posting stuff there that we're working on. And, we're working with a lot of really, really great people, and it just, like I said, it feels, we're in a really great momentum moment right now. It feels like things are just aligning in a really great way to support this project, and, including this talk. I mean, it's really great to be invited here. I think Pratt's a great school. I think you guys are really pushing things forward in a lot of very interesting ways. And so I'm really honored to, to be here and to be able to share my work with you. Tech difficulties aside, I mean, I apologize for that. It's like, oh my God, that was like the worst, but we got through it, right?
Yeah, well, okay, maybe just one other little thing, and we're nearing the end, but I guess I want to ask, there's a student question around between access to energy, product, servers, and more, how can we both transition to and exist within a virtual world that would be more equitable than the world we exist in now? And maybe I'll just add to that. I wonder about given how much energy and electricity and so on goes into the servers, the kind of tangible dimensions of our, internet world. I wonder about how you think about the sort of expenditure of resources for that something like this requires.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think absolutely the servers and everything that power this have to be, the energy has to be sustainably generated. That's absolutely important to me. I think there are a lot of things that are hidden from us, right? So we're sitting here on Zoom, and there are server farms powering this and fans blowing and stuff happening, and it's somewhere else separated from where we are. So we don't have a connection to that. I think one of the things that I think will really help us is to be more connected to what's actually going on, right? To not have things like, I throw garbage away, it goes somewhere else, I don't know what happened to it. And I like to talk about this as knowing where your rain comes from. And I ask people this, do you know where your rain comes from? Because if you ask somebody this in Jamaica, they can tell you that when the clouds form over here, over the point, that's when the rain comes to us. But if it forms over the mountain, it's going to rain in the mountains and it's never going to come to us. Understanding the connection and understanding the natural world is something that we as city dwellers, especially in the global north and in places like New York, have completely lost touch with. We are in conditioned environments all the time. We don't feel even slightly uncomfortable for 1 minute of the day, right? And there's a huge transition between like stepping over the threshold of your house and like being in the heat all of a sudden, right? Whereas I think, in a place like Jamaica, more people have like a connection to outdoors, have a connection to what's happening in the environment. So having more of an understanding of that, I think, is really important. And then also having more transparency. Where does our energy come from? What is powering this? Because we could think this is great because we're not driving a car to go somewhere, but what is the carbon footprint of this? And so one of the things we're thinking about is having something where that becomes something that is part of your experience, so that you're constantly faced with your decisions and what the carbon footprint of those decisions is. However, the one thing that's really important to note is that this is not an individual problem per se. There are, companies that are doing things that have huge consequences. And so me taking all of my stuff and making a mason jar of garbage over the course of a year is a drop in the bucket compared to that. But we can vote with our dollars. We can inform ourselves and we can understand what's going on. And if we say, hey, we don't want this anymore, it's going to change. One of the things that I predict, and I think it's going to be again, that kind of weird gray area of, dystopian utopia, is probably some of the biggest pivots that we're probably going to see will be actually petroleum companies are going to do a hard pivot towards the second that they stop getting subsidies for this stuff, they're going to pivot. And all of a sudden we're going to be faced with this dilemma of, wow, the guys who made the problem are now making the green cars. What do we do? That's an interesting question. But I think, I would encourage you to see it not as, I mean, yes, there's definitely bad actors and bad guys in this, but we're all in the ship together. The oil executive, even if they think they're going to Mars, they're going down in the ship too. We're all in this together and we have to fix it together, however we can, by any means necessary.
All right, well, so I would say between that cliffhanger and call to arms, this is probably a good place to sort of...
No arms. I come in peace. No arms.
Call to action, let's
Call
say.
to positive action, yes.
This has been such a provocative and exciting set of proposals. So I think I can speak for everybody to say I can't wait to keep watching, stay tuned myself and participate. So thank you so much.
It's been great being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.